Hi everyone. I came across a report that I think sort of answers a question that was brought up during the Sarah Everard vigil earlier this year. That, of course, was a high-profile murder case, and it generated a whole debate around safety of women, and specifically about the Met, the Metropolitan Police, and their relationship with women, and all sorts of things around that. Now, at the time, I believe that the event was somewhat hijacked by, frankly, feminists pushing a certain narrative, um, namely that um, because of the actions of one bad man, that men in general not necessarily needed to be blamed, but needed to be kind of answerable for that. And they denied this, but some of the placards at the vigil were very, in my opinion, inflammatory, and I feel that there were people kind of almost hijacking that tragedy for their own ends. And Everard's own family was against that. They didn't want it to be turned into that sort of thing, as I understand it. Um, so anyway, one of the things that came up at the time was men need to step up. So this notion that all men are responsible, so men need to step up. Well, I've just read a report and I'm going to read it out here. It's not very long, so just bear with me. This is from Yahoo News. It's a link from The Independent. The reporter is Emily Atkinson. Passerby stops rapist by punching him in face and putting him in chokehold. A passerby stopped a rapist by punching him in the face and putting him in a chokehold, who preyed on a defenseless woman who had been on a night out in Southport. Um, Christopher Fletcher, who was passing by, heard the woman scream no and punched Stephen, I think that's pronounced Quesney, 23, earning him praise, a Liverpool court. I don't know what is with these links. Sometimes the grammar's off. Yeah, he was praised by a Liverpool Crown Court judge. Robert Wynne Jones, prosecuting, said the victim had been drinking at the Metropole Hotel in Portland Street earlier that night. He was joined by the woman. She was, yeah, that's the grammar is off on this. Um, he joined the woman, I think that's meant to be, in the pub, and where they remained together after the pub shut. And when they remained together after the pub shut, it might not be the report, to be fair, it might just be the way this is linked. Before walking through Southport railway station after 1 a.m. Um, right. Mr. Wayne Jones said the woman had been drunk. Court were presented with a CCTV clip which showed an altercation between the pair, resulting in the woman trying to get away. Mr. Wynne Jones says she runs off to the left and he pursues her. She is fighting him and is pulled backwards to the ground. Later on in the clip, Laquesne is seen attacking her in the bushes of a car park. Recorder Matthew Corbett Jones said it was only when a brave member of the public came to her rescue that her ordeal came to an end. Christopher Fletcher showed all the qualities of a brave, decent, upstanding member of the community in tackling you and summoning the police. The judge told Duquesne, it's plain to see that you had seized this opportunity when she was alone and vulnerable to prey on her. This was a brutal and terrifying attack on a defenseless woman in order for you to satisfy your desire for sexual gratification, which I have no doubt will cast a shadow across the rest of her life. The question was sentenced to 10 years and 6 months in jail, with a further 4 years and 6 months on licence. Mr. Fletcher is being put forward for formal recognition on the recommendation of the judge. Well, the first thing to say, as with all crime cases, is my thoughts are with the victim. I really hope she can rebuild her life. It must have been a terrifying ordeal. So I hope she could start to rebuild her life. On the issue of her being drunk, the victim's never to blame. But, even if you're in a vulnerable state, um, you're never to blame. It's entirely the responsibility of the rapist. Now, that's another thing that's come out of this incident. They recently, a police commissioner, I think it was for North Yorkshire, had to resign because He said something along the lines of women need to be careful at night time. Now, again, that's a side of it I think has got a little bit, it's become distorted because I do not think that issuing common sense guidelines is the same as victim blaming. And again, feminists are trying to conflate the two. They're saying that if the police try to issue advice about taking precautions, oh, well, you're blaming the victim. No, they're really, really not. And I don't think he should have had to resign if it was based on that's all that he said rather than something else. Um, I mean, put it this way, if an area has a high level of burglaries and the police tell householders to take extra precaution and make sure they lock up, and then someone becomes a victim of a burglary, is that the same as saying, well, you're to blame? No, I don't think it is. Issuing advice is not victim blaming. It's just not. So it kind of irritates me that that's being promoted as a thing because it's actually problematic because it means that the police are going to be in a situation where they never give advice because the response is, oh, you're victim blaming. And that's clearly absurd. But what struck me about this case was here you have a man potentially at risk to himself. He doesn't know if the attacker is armed. The guy could have a knife or anything. He doesn't know that. It's dark. He doesn't know the situation. He just knows this woman is in distress. So, because he's a decent bloke, he steps in. And not only does he, interrupt, he actually physically tackles the rapist. And this is brave. Um, Regardless of the build of the rapist or how physically strong he is, the fact of the matter is you just don't know with a stranger if they're armed or not. So for Christopher Fletcher to, risk his personal safety to do the decent thing and defend this woman, huge respect to him. But I think feminists, and I keep saying feminists because they are the ones who kept pushing this narrative. They need to look at something like this and think, well, actually, a lot of guys do step up. And I have no doubt this is far from the only such case. I find it very hard to believe that most men would see a woman in distress and just do nothing. Now, they wouldn't necessarily respond in the same way and physically tackle the guy and get him in a chokehold, but most men, and other women for that matter, most people are decent. They wouldn't just walk by. Certainly not in this country. I don't know about other countries if there's a passive culture, but I think the British people are actually quite good at that sort of thing. I think as a national characteristic, we are good at stepping in. Um, so this whole thing about men need to step up, they do. They really do. I haven't been in that situation, but I've been in a situation where I saw a woman who was being harassed, and thankfully it didn't escalate. The guy kind of got a hint of his own. Well, I don't know what she said to him, but it was in a pub. It was near closing time and it was pretty quiet. I was having a drink myself, was reading, and one of the, I presume, regulars was just being a bit sleazy with the barmaid, a youngish woman, and I could tell her, I could see she was trying to say, you've had your drink, go home and stuff. And I was sort of eyeing this situation. I was getting ready to leave because it was closing time. But I was sort of eyeing this situation, just sort of looking at it, thinking, will this escalate? Because I didn't want to interfere. She was doing her job. And anyway, afterwards, with the guy left of his own accord, I could see she was a little bit shaken. So I asked, was she okay? Now, clearly it's not comparable. It didn't escalate. There was no aggression or anything like that. Would I have got involved if something had escalated? I would like to think I would have, because I was sort of assertive and I was sort of on edge and thinking I may have to do something here. And I don't think it's even a case of like chivalry or, um, you know, sort of that sense of being a gentleman or being um, helping a woman in distress. It's just a case generally of being a decent human being. And the fact is, men are physically stronger. So maybe another woman could also be a deterrent because she could distract the rapist, but she won't have the same physical strength as a man. So I think the men, I would never ever dictate to another man, you should put your own safety at risk to help a woman that you don't know. And paradoxically, there have been situations where guys have intervened. I heard about a case in Birmingham actually, um, whereby when I was studying in the Midlands, of a man who saw this altercation between a couple, and it looked like the guy was getting violent. So he intervened and he told the guy to back off. Now, what happened? Did the woman, thank him? Did she take that as an opportunity to run away or something? No. She turned on the guy that intervened and told him to mind his own business. And I'm not for a second saying that all women have this attitude. I think most women wouldn't do that. I think most women would see it for what it is and be grateful. But in that case, that's what happened. So, you know, some guys would look at that and think, why the hell should I risk my safety when I'm not even going to get thanked for it? And it shouldn't be about, looking for praise or thanks. That shouldn't be the issue. It should be about doing the right thing. But um, this whole thing about stepping up, I think when people make that argument, they have to quantify it. What do you mean by that exactly? What do you mean by that? I mean, in this sort of situation, a guy could maybe do what that man did, right? But what if it's an older man, a guy who is maybe a pensioner? He doesn't have the physical strength to take on a younger man. What's he supposed to do? Maybe he can phone the police. Maybe he could distract the rapist. Um, so that's an issue. What if it's a gang attacking a woman? An individual man, no matter how brave he is, it's extremely limited what he could do. Again, in that situation, maybe distracting them is an area. I certainly don't think there would be anything praiseworthy or noble about doing nothing. I think that would be quite lamentable, actually. Um, and I'm not saying, by the way, that all men are like this. There might be some men who will do nothing. But I would make the case quite confidently that most men and most people, if they see someone in distress, particularly if they see a woman in distress, they would do something. I say particularly a woman because if you get two guys in an altercation, a lot of people would just think, oh, they're just two guys having a fight. Um, so I think the public notion of defending a man is far, far less. Even though sometimes you might have a situation where an innocent man's being harassed by some yob. I mean, certainly I've had plenty of abuse. Minding my own business, I've had things shouted at me. I'm not for a second suggesting it's the same thing. And obviously, the risk of men being raped is much, much, much less. It does happen, but it's considerably less. So, um, all I would say is, you know, dictating the men need to step up, it kind of ignores that a lot of men already do. That's the first thing. And secondly, it is basically expecting men to take risks to themselves. And, whether they should or shouldn't, that is what you're putting on them. Um, or at the very least, if that's not the case, at the very least, they need to quantify what they mean by men need to step up. Because most men will have nothing but disgust and contempt for a rapist because they think that could be my girlfriend, that could be my sister, that could be my mother, that could be my daughter, you know, that could be my female friend. Most men are actually quite defensive of women. If you have a dynamic, particularly in Western culture, if you have a dynamic where there is a group of people in some sort of situation and it's perhaps a challenging situation, and let's say seven of them are guys and one of them is a woman. Let's say you have a situation, this sometimes happens in wartime, where you have military personnel are perhaps taken prisoner. The men in the group will almost always be very wary of like their female comrade. Like, what will her fate be? And We live in an era of equality and egalitarianism and all that, which is very important. But I think there is an instinctive mindset in most men of being protective towards women. So again, this flies in the face of this idea men need to step up. Because in that situation, I think most men do, just naturally. Not because they're trying to seek praise, not because they're trying to be bravado or machismo, simply because it's instinctively the right thing to do. So, and by the way, if I see a guy and I see a gang laying into him, I would absolutely feel inclined to do something to intervene there. I'm not saying I'm Superman, I can't take on a whole gang, but I would certainly be shocked and I would like to think that I would do something. I say I like to think I'm pretty sure I would because I have intervened in situations. I could be a little bit reckless sometimes actually because my views on crime. I mean, I was almost excuse me, I was almost mugged in Wolverhampton with a group of friends. These guys came up, they demanded money, and okay, me and my big mouth, I said, one of my friends, guy, said that he didn't have any, and then the would-be mugger sort of got closer to him and said, "Give me it," and I was like, "Did you not hear me?" Said he has none, so. And it turned into a bit of an altercation. Thankfully, these guys were absolutely out of it. They weren't so the damage they could have inflicted was a lot less. And it was a whole big thing. I had to go to the police station and um, make a statement. It was just a whole big thing. But I know that my instinctive instinct is not to turn away. So I step up um, where I can. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know any anecdotes, particularly guys who are watching this. Have you ever been in a situation where you've had to step up? Um, and all I would say to feminists, with all due respect, kind of putting it on men to step up, you're ignoring the fact that many already do. So please just acknowledge that, you know? Um, because otherwise men will feel resentful. They'll think, well, there's this assumption that men don't. And there's this assumption that men are somehow okay with scumbags who rape women. Of course not. I mean, I don't think there's any apathy on the part of men in terms of justice and so on. Incidentally, this sentence, it's not often I say a sentence is right, but I think that's about right. It's a long sentence, but it's an awful crime. So I think it's probably about right. I just hope the victim can rebuild her life. I mean, I imagine she's going to need therapy for post-traumatic stress and all sorts of things. But huge respect to Christopher Fletcher. Clearly, he's a decent bloke, and right that the judge is recommending him. I'm not sure what that means, if it's just a formal notification or what, but I'll put a link to the story and it's just something to think about. I believe I'm quite optimistic about human nature, particularly in this country. I believe the majority of British people are decent. I believe the majority of British people do intervene. In fact, we've seen this in terrorist attacks. We've seen, and I should say, not all British people. In some of those incidents, there was a Greek waiter in one of the London attacks. There was a Spanish tourist. You know, most human beings have a decent streak in them. And I think it was either the Westminster attack or the London Bridge attack. I think it was the London Bridge attack. The courage of the public in tackling an armed terrorist is incredible. Um, waiters were fighting with these Islamists with chairs, and just huge respect to those people. So that's an optimistic thing about human nature. When it comes to it, people step up. Thinking of a famous incident, United '93. That famous situation where the fourth hijacked plane of September 11th. It's almost become folkloric. It's almost become um like something that's passed down, like the heroes of Flight 93. Um, and they are heroes, not just men. I mean, there's some of the bigger guys on that flight, one of them was a rugby player, and they came up with this plan to take on the terrorists because they knew what was happening. Todd Beamer, Mark Bingham, Jeffrey Glick were the ringleaders, but others join in as well. And the courage of, so that people don't think I'm just praising men, the courage of the flight attendants, women like Betty Young, was incredible. The way they showed resilience, the way they showed such a strong spirit in such frightening, trying circumstances is admirable. So I think when it steps up, people can be great. Um, and I just think there needs to be an acknowledgement of that. So when we hear about men needing to step up, all I say is look at a case like this. It's not unique.